Welcome to Conference Talks Podcast. Join us as we explore and discuss key messages from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints General Conference Talks, inspiring listeners to strengthen their faith in Jesus Christ through heartfelt conversations, personal reflections, and practical applications. In this week's episode, we look at Elder John D. Amos's talk from the 2025 October conference titled The Good News Recipe, and we are joined by our special guest, Blake Bevans. We discussed Elder Amos's analogy of gospel principles and commandments as the ingredients we need in our recipe for a happy life that is centered on Jesus Christ. We also explore how by small and consistent actions we are shaped into the people God wants us to be, and that our capacity increases for us to receive more and become more. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and please like and subscribe for more content. Welcome to Conference Talks Podcast. We are so excited to be here with you guys today. This is episode 26, and we are studying Elder John D. Amos's talk from the last General Conference, and it's called The Good News Recipe. And our special guest today is Blake Bevans. A little bit about Blake. Blake is an alumni for the Levitt Ward, where a lot of our guests have been coming from here. Blake was born and raised in Cardston, Alberta. He served a full-time mission in the Ogden, Utah area before receiving a degree in HR at BYU in Provo. Blake now lives and works in Lethbridge, where he loves to spend his free time running, reading, and sharing his love for Jesus Christ. So we're so grateful to have you on the podcast today, Blake. Just before we get into our discussion today, I wanted to pass it over to Dad. You have a little bit of insight on Elder Amos and a bit of background for him.
Yeah, I'm so excited for Blake, and just grateful to have a fellow HR guy on the podcast. But just wanted to share a few things about Elder Amos as well. Elder Amos was called as a general authority into the 70 in April of 2025. Both him and his wife are engineers. His wife actually worked at NASA for 30 years, and Elder Amos also worked in the Navy. So I thought that was pretty cool. That's where they met, going to school. The other thing that really stood out to me about Elder Amos's journey was that it was very much like mine. He was introduced to the church in his 20s. His wife was the one who introduced it to him, and he went on a journey there to find his way to the gospel and just really appreciate his conversion perspective. And both of them have been so dedicated to Jesus Christ in their lives. They served as mission presidents in Louisiana, and they've just been united in their focus there.
That's really cool. I love that insight. The things I would never have known about him or his wife. That's unique. Blake, what drew you to this talk? What were some insights that you had when you first read it and then coming back to it? What were something special that you felt?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, first off, thanks so much for having me here. I feel like I'm underqualified to be on a podcast. Isn't like typically what I do, but I'm honored to be here for sure. And thank you so much, Mike, for sharing a little bit of background on Elder Amos. Yeah, I didn't know any background and realized that he'd been called so recently to the Quorum of the 70, which is really cool. Yeah, it's amazing. We hear these amazing talks, but then it's like, there's a whole life, there's a whole story, and there's a whole like God preparing these amazing individuals to share these nuggets, of wisdom with us. And so in terms of like what drew me to this talk, I really enjoyed like everybody enjoyed the accent. I feel like nobody listening to Brother Amos's talk would have been mad to hear such a fun accent and such an engaging form of delivery for this talk, especially so late in the conference talks in the Sunday afternoon session. And so I feel like a lot of people, I sat up in my seat. I was maybe dozing a little bit when I heard this fun Louisiana accent. And then it just really drew me in as I heard the unique, using recipes and talking about Christ as the perfect ingredient to our lives. And just, the simplicity and it just felt very, very profound. And it got me engaged right away. I feel like I don't know what else to say other than it worked. It got me up on my seat.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I felt, just like you said, immediately engaged and brought in. I also just felt like there was this real authentic perspective that he was bringing. And I like when leaders can just take things that are applicable to them or that that resonates with them and their life and their background, and bring that into a gospel perspective. I think it's so unique to have those opportunities and different lenses of looking at things. And so, yeah, it's really unique looking at this whole talk in kind of a perspective of a recipe, and bringing up the points of how to live a happy life, is following the recipe that we have in the scriptures, and leaning onto the council of prophets. And I'm curious if either of you guys have felt like that has been the case, where there is a recipe for how to live the gospel, there is a recipe for happiness, and that by following that, we get the results that we have, the outcome that we have, and that it's simple and straightforward and yet nuanced at the same time. There's variances in recipes. There's different things and outcomes that we get from cooking and working with stuff. So just curious about how that analogy fits in, or thoughts about it from either of you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you see it so much in the scriptures where it truly is simple. I think it's easy to try to overcomplicate the gospel. And I think you can even see that in the scriptures sometimes. And I can definitely see it in my own life sometimes, where you feel like you need to get more out of something that really true, like at its core, is very simple. And what I love and what I think of the most, like in the scriptures in regards to this, of course, just like looking to God and living. And when we're studying the Old Testament this year, of course, like when Moses, I believe, he has the serpent that the Israelites have to just look at, and then they'll be healed. And of course, that serpent represents our Savior, Jesus Christ, and thinking about how some of the Israelites looked and were healed, and some of them didn't. And reading that story or thinking about that, I mean, I'm like, of course I would look, right? But sometimes our pride, or I think there are definitely times in my life where maybe I don't look. And I think that relates so much to this talk and that simplicity, where it's like, we just need to look to God to live. Our life is a recipe. And, sometimes that recipe can be a little bit of a hot mess, but that secret ingredient is Christ. And like, we simply just need to add that ingredient. And maybe sometimes we're prideful, like, no, I can figure it out. I'm going to get this together. I'll add more flour. I'll add more salt, more sugar, because we're going to do it on our own. Right. But what it comes down to, of course, is just looking to God and live, just grabbing the salt shaker that has, I guess, Christ on it, and adding that to the recipe of our lives. And that's what's going to make it amazing and beautiful. And we don't really need to look further than that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And I really liked how Elder Amos, he shared about how, as you were talking about, Blake, how the recipe can go wrong for us. And it feels like something that can happen all the time. I remember President Uchtdorf, he talked about, surprisingly, an airplane analogy. And he talked about how an airplane is constantly off. The journey on the airplane is to course correct, right? And then I think about this talk, and like you said, how, it really, so often our recipe is going off track there. He says sometimes we struggle to follow directions, or perhaps we do something out of order, or something happens that is out of our control, and so on. So I'd love to hear more from both of you about what are those things that can cause our recipes to go off course, and with our complexities in life.
I think for me, sometimes what I struggle with or get frustrated by is just the simplicity of it. Sometimes I look at the ingredients and like, that's it. This is what's going to bring it about. And I think maybe overestimating or overcomplicating things, or just being unsure of the things that I'm supposed to do, that it will have the real outcome that I'm looking for. Really, I'm just describing kind of a little bit of a lack of faith or a lack of trust there, but it is something you experiment with, right? And that's what you have to do with recipes. You try things out, you figure it out, you experiment. And most often we come back to being like, the recipe was written the way it was supposed to be written, right? This is the outcome that I'm supposed to get from it. But I also love that the antidote to all of it is Jesus Christ, that the ingredient that fixes everything and fixes the things that are out of our control is placing Jesus at the center of it. And I think that makes a lot of sense, especially when dealing with faith crisis or going through things where everything feels up on its head. you don't know where true north is or center anymore. And it just feels like elements of your faith and testimony have been chipped away and there's nothing left but Christ. But if Christ is there, everything can be put back into place, or it's all good, right? If we can have a singular focus. Visuals on my social media lately have been this cup with like black liquid or coffee in it, and you hold it under running water. And it's all about how time heals all, but also Christ healing all, right? It's that implementing, right, of the clear water that eventually takes out the mud and dirt until that cup is running clear. And I think that's really what's striking home to me in this talk. And as I think about it over and over, is that the more of Christ that I'm putting into my life, everything else fixes itself and it makes sense. And then I can become clear and light and understanding. So I like that I can lean onto that simplicity when maybe the other things just aren't feeling like they're fitting in, or I'm struggling with them.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more to that. And of course, like to you saying about how it's a process, like if we're putting that cup under the water, like it takes a long time for it to filter through and for it to become clear. I think it's easy as well to, like the gospel is simple, but simple doesn't mean easy, right? Like it's a process. We have to be consistent with adding that ingredient of Christ in our lives. And it can also just be, well, not sometimes, but always, at least for me, it's difficult to add that ingredient because, maybe in your life, you're like, oh, I'm wanting to make a cake, or I'm wanting to make a hamburger, and then you add that ingredient of Christ in your life and he has something else in mind. It's like, yeah, you think that's the recipe, right? You think that's what the end result is going to be, but it's like, no, you're actually going to be, I don't know, like a salad or something else. I don't know. And that's part of reconciling our will with him, right? And it's simple in the fact that, yeah, we add that ingredient. Like if we're truly humble, we will become what we need to become. We also have to set aside our preconceived notions and we have to accept what that recipe is making, and it truly is God's plan, and trusting that even if we're thinking, oh, I was not, like that is not what I had in mind, I didn't want to be a salad or whatever, and trusting that that is going to be the way to that happy life. I know, like looking back in those times where I feel like I follow God and I feel like I'm getting to the end of a road that I was like, hey, there's no way that this is better than where I was going. But as you keep going, and then looking back, you realize, oh my goodness, like I am so happy that I followed this path and went down this road, because all of a sudden that other way seems way far away, and you realize that it wasn't as good as it seemed. So simple, but not necessarily easy to add that ingredient.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's such a good point, Blake, about how if we're willing to let our recipes, be shaped by God, right? And I was thinking about one of my challenges is that, like you said, maybe I'm harder to let go of some of the things that I thought, should happen. And trying to add that flour and that, spice or whatever ingredient that might, get it back on course, as opposed to sort of like allowing that recipe to emerge, and seeing the beauty and the deliciousness that can be there if I just put my trust in God there and go to his will.
Yeah, I agree with those points about, it's the trust, it's the letting over of will, of opinion, of letting him kind of take control of that. And then it's reaping the benefits too. And I like with the recipe, right? It's kind of repetitive motions and actions, right? These are things that we're constantly going to be doing and needing to consistently fill our cup in our lives with, prayer and scripture study and going to church and following Christ. It's these roadblocks that we build into our life that create the results and the relationship that we want. I'm curious, Blake, because a lot of the talk, he centered around kind of his experience as a mission president and with missionaries, and in different kind of ways where he was leaning on to the Spirit and on revelation and counseling with them. Curious if you had any experiences on your mission or things that brought to mind some of the situations that you have gone through, or things that felt relevant to what he was speaking about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, right off the bat, I was really thinking about my mission with this talk when he mentions the Creole seasoning, the Tony's spice to add to make up for the imperfections in the recipe. And it's actually really fun that he ends up going and talking more about missionary work because with like that Tony's seasoning, I never even knew that it existed until I served my mission in Ogden, Utah. And it was like a staple in every missionary apartment. So like every single one just like had a Tony's spice on the stove. And I thought that was so fun because like when I think of that spice, like I do think of my mission and yeah, just like that being related to Christ in a way. I thought it was really, really cool, really profound. And the spice is very, very good, by the way. So if you haven't tried it, you can see why why Brother Amos was wanting to talk about that. But anyways, in terms of my mission and in terms of what Brother Amos ends up going more into and being charitable and with small and simple things, I mean, I see that over and over in my mission and definitely having some companionships that were more of a challenge at times. And yeah, I can think of, one companion especially where they're just a language barrier and a cultural barrier. And so it's not necessarily that we were at odds in terms of like what we wanted to do, but it was just difficult to be on the same page and feel like we could work together and be equally yoked in order to accomplish the work of the Lord. And I'm not going to say I was perfect and that it necessarily was a perfect happy ending, but I can definitely testify that in that companionship specifically that a little bit of charity, a little bit of kindness, and a little bit of love. And more importantly, all of those things, just like small and simply across each and every day, just made, so much of a difference. And it wasn't necessarily linear where it was like, oh, every single day was a little bit better. It was more like a couple days were good and better than some were like, oh, we're going backwards. But overall, it was, we're making our way an upward trajectory. I find that's very relatable to my own life and probably a lot of people's experience with the gospel and conversion where we're promised all of these blessings as we follow our covenants and as we love as Christ did and as we follow his example. But that doesn't mean that every day is going to be bliss. But hopefully when we're looking back, we can see that, my small and simple things are great things brought to pass. And so I definitely have seen that in, not only on my mission, but just my life overall. And what an amazing principle. I could talk about it for a long time.
So great. Like, I also know that you're a runner and you run long distance, don't you?
Yeah.
And marathons as well?
Yeah, just kind of, any running. I like it.
And have you run in any particular marathons over the last year?
Yeah, for sure. I've been doing a lot of like trail running, which is like a little bit different. And so that can be like a marathon distance or longer. I have done some like traditional marathons, like I did the St. George, I've done the Boston, the Chicago. So they're fun. I like it.
Awesome. And so I'm just wondering, as you think about yourself as a runner in relation to this talk and some of the principles that have been shared, has there anything that stood out to you in terms of, what you've learned from running and being in good habits there, or anything that stood out to you related to your running experiences?
Absolutely. I mean, the phrase small and simple things, great things come to pass. It just takes on like a whole different meaning when I think about it in terms of running for sure, because running really is just one of those sports where you're building, you kind of call them, I'd say like stacking bricks is like a pretty, a common said thing when you're doing like between your longer runs, your workouts, and just like all of just everything that you're doing to prepare yourself for the big race. You call it, you're just kind of stacking bricks. It's a really hard session. And it's like, well, that was a big brick that got stacked today. And then of course it builds something amazing, a fortress of fitness that you can take into your that's a big thing. And I think also just in terms of your capacity, like with running, I think what a lot of people don't realize is like with running, like physiologically, and I'm a business major, so I'm not going to go too in depth with like the biology and stuff. So I apologize if I say some things that are not super scientific. I'll try my best to explain. But basically, like as humans, we're very special in the sense that we can adapt to stress very well, and our capacity grows. And when we break down our muscles, they grow back stronger, as long as, of course, we're recovering, we're getting enough sleep, we're eating. But yeah, in terms of like if we're recovering well and we're meticulous and slowly taking on more and more and more stress, our capacity is so much greater than we could ever imagine, and definitely more than I could ever imagine in terms of running. I remember starting running and doing, a 5K, a 10K, and thinking like, whoa, this is so long. And it is, but then realizing that people do half marathons, they do marathons, they do ultra marathons, and just, these events where you're outside just all day. It's like, it's crazy to even fathom that could be possible. But yeah, over the years, I've done a lot of running, probably much to my family's dismay. They wish maybe I'd go out and like hang out with people more, have a little bit more balanced in that respect at times. But yeah, with all the years of running, all the years of stacking bricks, those small and simple things, it's been an amazing experience, and something that I think about a lot in a spiritual sense as well, and an intellectual sense, because it crosses over, right? Where we start with small, we stack those bricks, and our capacity to, whether it's receiving revelation, whether it's to feel the Spirit, whether it's to serve others, or to really study the scriptures with any habit over time. It's amazing what we can do as humans. And then when we pair that with Christ, when we're equally yoked with him, it's just even infinitely more that we can do. Like, we truly can't comprehend what we can do with Christ. He's the ultimate brick stacker, I guess you could say, in our lives.
Yeah, I so appreciate that. Like, I mean, that concept of brick stacking, that's gonna stick with me, because I really like the analogy. I can struggle sometimes. I put a brick up there and I'm like, well, what's that doing for me, right? But as you talked about, if I stack those bricks every day, that becomes something wonderful, right? A house, or the Great Wall, right? Like, so I think that's such a powerful analogy, and also really appreciate what you shared about how, if we're stacking those bricks with Christ, how much he magnifies those efforts and the results that we receive as we partner and yoke. And I think sometimes we think about, we need Christ when we're struggling, but just as much or even more so when we're trying to move forward and upward, how much better that journey is when we have Christ with us.
I really also like what you said, Blake, about the human body's capacity to grow and to take more on. And I was really feeling that with like, okay, the same way of our spiritual muscles and capacity, or just when we're going through hard things, or we're having trials or difficult situations, I think often our focus is, can we just get back to normal? Can we just get back to where we were, which we felt like was on the path, instead of realizing that, no, we're going beyond that. We're growing here. We're going to become better than that. And I think that's a much more healthy and, more hopeful perspective to have, instead of just going back to when it was good, or to when we were safe or okay or whatever, but that we're going to improve, that this is going to get better. Our capacity is going to grow. Our ability to, I think, love is deeper. Our ability to experience all these emotions and the Spirit is just so much more enriched if we're able to kind of take these things in stride. I was also like really impressed with when you were talking a bit about your mission experience and with Elder Amos. I loved his leadership qualities in the talk. Like he took time to really notice this missionary. Like he could tell that something was off. He wanted to understand him. He took time to listen to all of his concerns, let him unburden himself. And then he also took a lot of time to think carefully and then first go to the Lord, right? Taking time for both of them to pray and then to open the scriptures and to read it, and then to ask the missionary to like really think about and to be prepared to follow the answers in the scriptures. I think it's just such great way of teaching and helping people. Like I think that's our mission here as members of the church, as family members, sons, daughters, mothers, fathers. We're here to guide people back to Christ and to continue to guide them on this journey of how we find answers and insight, not necessarily to give them our opinion or to make problems go away. If you've had experiences with letting the Spirit really guide in situations where either maybe you might have an answer or a thought or an idea about how it could go, or taking a moment to pause and not react, not fill in the gap, but letting the Spirit guide there.
I did think about in the talk for sure. I really thought it was interesting, how Elder Amos had the Spirit really guiding, and I thought what really struck me was just right off the bat, he didn't go into what he wanted to talk about. He could see that Elder was struggling, and maybe he was looking down at the floor, and just like very, very vigilant and also in tune with the Spirit to simply start out by asking, what, I'm not even like, how are things going? Just like, what do you want to talk to me about? What is on your mind? Because he could clearly sense that. And I think that's so powerful, because I think so often when I'm maybe in a similar situation, I'm trying to give advice or say things and talking over rather than truly listening both to the other individual but also to the Spirit. And so very impressive in terms of leadership qualities from Elder Amos, and definitely something I would like to emulate so much more. I think it's so important to, of course it's great to follow the Spirit anytime you can, especially when you're working with other individuals. As we know, humans are very complicated. I mean, I can barely understand like what I'm thinking at any given time. There's a lot going on and in our brains, and so to work with other individuals and to be able to discern their needs and to truly help them out, and especially to turn them to Christ, it makes sense why we would need the Spirit at its full max volume, and we need to be spiritually prepared to feel that. And I can definitely think of some experiences for sure. Like one that really sticks out in my mind is on my mission at one time. I remember me and a different companion. There's no excuses. We were the same language, same culture, everything. We were just having a little bit of a spat. We could feel, the adrenaline starting to build a little bit. We're just a little angry. It might have been COVID too. We're a little bit, seeing too much of each other and not getting out. But so I can't remember exactly what we were arguing about, but I do remember just feeling a spiritual prompting, like we need to say a prayer right now, even though we're both kind of angry. And so we said a prayer, and you could just feel just the temperature change and the mood change, and the Spirit really just surprisingly come like flooding into our apartment as we said a very simple prayer. And it wasn't super long or super profound, but just the thought to pray and to follow that prompting, it was so powerful. And just both me and my companion, we looked at each other after and it was like, whoa. It was so like emotionally jarring almost. It's like, how could we have been so mad? Well, not like super mad, but like decently mad a couple seconds ago. Now it's like, why were we like, why would I ever be mad at you? Like we're just here serving God, and then we were back to work. And so that was an interesting experience for sure, and very profound, and something that I think about often. I think also just in work, of course, with HR, of course, there's a lot of sensitive situations, and you're working with individuals where there's a lot of things going on maybe in their personal lives, and that delicateness. And of course, like I might not be able to say a prayer necessarily with the individual before speaking, but of course, like I can have a prayer in my heart, and I can make sure like I'm spiritually preparing each day by studying the scriptures and having good prayers in the morning and throughout the day. And of course, like God loves all of his children, and in any instance, and as we're able to listen to the Spirit, he'll help us, whether it's in our church lives, whether it's in our professional lives, whether it's in our personal lives or family lives, and we can navigate those difficult, often uncomfy situations.
I think that another fabulous example of inviting the Spirit and essentially inviting Christ, and and it resonates with me as well. Just the other day, I was thinking about the situation I'm in, kind of in a contract situation, and I had some frustration towards one of the parties involved. And in my head, I could justify why I might be frustrated. But then I kept asking myself, if I'm feeling this way, am I really in the right heart state and head state to deal with this? Am I approaching this from a Christ-like perspective? And it was very difficult because my mind kept wanting to go back to the justifications and the challenges. But I think, as you said, Blake, that we can check in and see how these situations are making us feel. And it gives us the opportunity to humble ourselves and invite the Spirit, invite Jesus Christ into those instances where we can do that. And I've had many instances where I've asked for something thinking it was going to happen a certain way, and God makes it happen differently, but he makes it happen in a way that there is no doubt that God was involved. I think about Nephi in the wilderness when his brothers tied him up and he asked God to give him the strength to break the bands. Well, instead God loosed the bands. And I always wondered, like, why didn't he just let Nephi do it his way? And I think it was probably such a blessing for Nephi, because Nephi would know for sure this wasn't an adrenaline rush, right? That God made that happen for him.
Yeah, those are great points, and really appreciate what you shared there, Blake, about just your experience on acting on that impression with your mission companion, because I think that's the whole point of it, right? We get these little inklings and things and ideas from the Spirit of what to do, but only if we choose to act on it, only if we use our agency, humble ourselves enough to do that and to change that, do we have that result, right? You wouldn't be able to change the vibe and the energy without kneeling in prayer and acting upon that, right? That wouldn't have just gone away if you'd continued on. I mean, it might have dissipated in time, but it's interesting to see that as we get better at acting on promptings and impressions. He quotes President Nelson quite a bit through his talk. And at the end of the talk, he talked about how President Nelson teaches that personal revelation comes through praying, listening, writing impressions, and then acting. And just the importance of acting on those impressions and like really taking note of it. And I think that is, again, one of the fundamental skills that we could learn as human beings on this earth is to follow through on impressions. I felt like having President Nelson as a prophet was a really good like visual illustration for us on someone that just acts with immediacy and certainty on things and really follows through. I want to develop that skill better of not overthinking it and acting more on impressions. Yeah. Have you guys had any experiences where there have been impressions for things to do that either you have brushed away initially or came back and decide to look at that changed a whole experience or situation that made a real impact on you or someone else?
I mean, I think that when it talks about in the talk about how your capacity grows and how you're able to receive more and more revelation, that is definitely something I need to and would love to work on so much more. And I think of my capacity for revelation, I feel like I am on such a lower level than I could be. And oftentimes revelation, it comes in the form, I guess, like in the scriptures where it says how it's better to be humble than to be compelled to be humble. I feel like oftentimes I'm on the compelled to be humble side. unfortunately, and God has to like intervene to make stuff happen almost sometimes in my life. And I'll pray lots of nights and ask to be more humble and more submissive for revelation. And I cringe when I pray to be more humble, because I just know that there's gonna be yeah, there's ample opportunity to humble me, and there's been lots of times in my life where I feel like I've been humbled in a grandiose way. And but yeah, it's definitely better when we listen to the promptings and, like you're saying, don't overthink it, and yeah, act immediately rather than brushing things off. And yeah, I can definitely testify that that is very much the better way. I think of a time recently where I really felt just like the blessing of revelation. I've been able to serve in a capacity where I'm helping out with the Temple family history for the YSA stake. And it's been such a blessing because, of course, I'm always wanting to go to the temple more and spend more time in the temple. And I know it might sound a little bit selfish, but this has really just given me the opportunity and the excuse to, and enough maybe guilt to make sure that I'm actually going more and much more regularly than I ever have in my entire life. Well, I guess except maybe in high school, we used to always go on Fridays to do baptisms. But other than that, yeah, I feel like I've been going as consistently in terms of like spending time in the celestial room, definitely more than any other time in my life. And it's just really built my testimony in terms of like preparing yourself for revelation. Of course, like we can receive it anywhere, but when we do take the time to spiritually prepare and to especially attend his holy house and to take the time to sit in that celestial room for a good chunk of time after our endowment sessions, it's made such a huge difference in my life, especially in terms of just feeling peace. That's definitely like a time of transition in my life right now, being in the YSA and kind of getting started in my career out of school. Of course, still looking for that next step in terms of like dating and marriage. And so it can feel like that the recipe of my life is just a mess of ingredients strewn all across the table, and that it's just like it's really not coming together. But when I'm able to spend time in the temple, especially, I just feel God's voice saying, like in due time, trust and peace be unto you. And because we can't go wrong as we follow him. And even though it is simple and we can remember that anytime, we don't have to necessarily sit in the temple, but life gets so crazy and you can get so caught up in it. And so taking that time and that revelation, and maybe that's a little bit selfish in terms of like it's revelation for me just to get by, not necessarily um, to reach out and help people while I do get those promptings and have those experiences. But I feel like where I've really felt the revelation the most in my life lately is just feeling his love and him saying to keep trusting me and that it'll all work out. And I'm still here. I still feel like we're going somewhere, not sure exactly where that destination is at this point, but he gives us that peace both on the way, and then of course like as we're getting maybe closer. But of course whenever we get to a specific destination, it's our spiritual progression, it keeps going anyways. And so it makes sense why he asks us to look in an eternal perspective, because in reality it's all one eternal round. We're always progressing, we're always growing. And so even though, like Gabriella was saying earlier, we just want to be comfortable, we just want things to go back to the way they were, but in reality, it's never going to be maybe comfortable in the sense that we yearn for, but it's because it's so much greater what he has in mind for us anyways.
Great example, Blake, of how the temple can be one of those key ways to add more Jesus Christ into our lives. And I just wanted to open it up to both of you. knowing that that's kind of at the core of the talk, what are some other ways that you've really more intentionally added more Jesus Christ into your life, and what difference that's made?
I think for me, it's been just inputting so many different sources of him. Doing this podcast, studying conference talks has just been, again, a real influx in my life of centering it around him, and words of prophets, studying the scriptures. I've always been fascinated with the Old Testament. I find the stories very gripping, and there's a lot to look at Christ and the symbolism there and their lives. And so I just feel like the more sources that seek to edify myself and to promote him and to give insight, that's been the joy, and that's helped me, I think, see him more and recognize him more. Like he's in my life, and there's more space for him, there's more capacity I have for him to share about him, talk about him, and to lean on him. I think really developing this friendship with Christ, which I desire and would be kind of the greatest product, I think, of my mortality, would be getting closer to my heavenly parents and developing that relationship with Christ. So that has changed everything, and it continues to change me and shape me day by day.
Yeah, I feel like I've been too blessed, honestly, with the opportunities and just the people being put in my life in terms of giving me opportunities. I mean, even just being on the podcast here and being able to have an excuse to really dig into a conference talk more and to hear your guys' experience. Like it's just another thing that just kind of plopped on my lap, and yeah, it's been like that a lot, I feel like, for me recently, especially. And I think that is a little bit of a snowball effect for trying to put Christ a little bit more at my life, and it's been such a blessing. I think another thing that's just kind of plopped on my way that's been such a blessing has been to serve in a capacity in the YSA stake, where I've been able to have some callings where I've been able to get to know a lot of people through the stake and really have an excuse to make sure I am getting to know people and serving. And that has been just such a blessing, and it's made me prioritize service so much more than I have at times past, especially since like being back from my mission. And I just have such a strong testimony of service. There's so many things we can spend the day doing and so many things to help ourselves out, but like truly as we look to serve others, like that's when we truly find ourselves. And I've loved that opportunity. I've also had the opportunity to, like one of the bishops in our YSA stake, he gave us the to study our scriptures in the morning at the crack of dawn when we get up. The first thing that we do. I feel like that's an invitation that's probably been given to me 100 times, and I still haven't done it, especially since after my mission. For some reason, this time it just really struck my heart, and I was like, "Hey, I need to change. Like this is the moment." And since then, I haven't been perfect, but I've been a lot better with like studying the scriptures right in the morning, and it has made truly, like, that's probably been the biggest thing that I've felt in terms of just like dumping that Christ special ingredient into my life and just turning things around and making life taste so much sweeter and grander than it has in times past, has been digging into Christ's words and into the scriptures. And yeah, I still have so many things that I would like to improve on, revelation, prayers. I'd like to serve so much more. I know that I am by no means a complete product, and there's a ways to go for my life's recipe to come to fruition. But I've been so blessed with opportunities to learn and to grow, and really I couldn't ask for more.
Well, thanks so much for that, Blake. It's a great testimony. Just wondering, is there anything else that we haven't talked about that either of you would like to bring forward from Elder Amos's talk?
I think just the last thing that I want to say is I love the name, the Good News Recipe, and how that this is, as we're living and striving to learn the gospel, we know that this is a plan of happiness. And as we share the gospel, that this is all good news. These are ingredients on how we can be the happiest here, on receiving celestial glory and really becoming the people that God wants us to be and becoming our best selves. So it's all joy, it's all happiness here. Our struggles and our trials, they are worth something, they mean something. It's to bring about our happiness and our good. So grateful for that.
Thank Gabrielle. I couldn't agree more, and love that analogy that's been stuck in my head from the talk, that the scriptures are a recipe book for happy living. And looking for those great recipes in the scriptures is something I'm definitely looking forward to doing more. Blake, I'm going to give you the final word on some final thoughts there. But I just wanted to say thank you so much. I feel energized and motivated from this conversation, and so grateful for your insights and your humility in how you've presented these things. I think you've given us a lot to consider about how we can add more Jesus Christ into our lives. And, as we think about the purpose of this podcast, which is to draw nearer to Jesus Christ. So over to you, Blake, for any final comments.
Thank you so much. You're too kind. I hope people can take, at least a couple nuggets where they felt the Spirit and feel inspired to turn closer to Christ and towards Him. It's definitely hopefully the takeaway from everything that I've been saying and what we've all been saying. I think just a final thought and thinking about the scriptures as just like the recipe book, and we see the stories in the scriptures and they're messy. They're not perfect, especially reading in the Old Testament this year for Come Follow Me. Yeah, there are some very, very interesting stories, and that made the cut for the Old Testament. I think thinking about that and thinking about our own lives, I think it's so easy to compare ourselves to others, and especially to compare ourselves unfairly and think like, oh, like if I am inviting Christ in my life, if I'm trying, things should be smooth, and definitely smoother than maybe they are at the present moment in your life. And it's not reasonable if we're gonna compare ourselves, which is never really a good idea. Looking at the scriptures is a great place to go, because by no means were those stories perfect, and the journeys were not necessarily linear. And I know at times, I've been thrown different ways where I didn't think that was what the plan was for me or what I wanted to do. I remember being out of high school and being excited to see the world when I go on my mission. I went to Ogden, Utah, and I remember that being a humbling thing. And of course, I love my mission. I love Ogden, Utah. I love Utah so much that I went back to school there. I remember that being such a humbling thing, where God's saying, no, like you are here for me and to serve people, not for yourself, to see the world. And I felt like that was the end of that. And going to school at BYU and graduating, it was definitely such a difficult transition for me. I was looking for work down in the States, and it was difficult with visa stuff and having to come back here, which I was excited to do, to be back with family, but it felt like I was going to be down there, and that was such a humbling experience and difficult to transition back, and felt like, I'm kind of picking up the pieces where, like, a lot of my friends down there, they're graduating, they're just kind of moving right along. It felt unfair. But what I've definitely learned through it all, and especially as I seek Christ and to add more of Christ in my life, is that we are so blessed. We're so blessed with opportunities, and truly the windows are open. And as we look up, we're able to catch those blessings. And it's not always easy, but I've truly felt that as we follow that good news recipe, as we add more of Christ in our lives, it really doesn't matter what is or isn't happening, which is like what our previous prophet, President Nelson, said so many times, has been quoted so many times. And I think we it should be quoted more and we should think about it more because it is so relevant. Christ is truly the answer to anything, good times or bad. And I love him and he is my savior. And I say that in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here with us, Blake. And this has been a great conversation.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks for joining us on Conference Talks. We hope today's discussion has inspired you to live the message of the gospel a little more each day. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and share it with a friend. Until next time, let's keep learning, living, and becoming true disciples of Jesus Christ.